came here today to give the X-Men a chance to show the world that mutants are just like us. People, normal. And you lie. Why lie?
Because you're normal.
Excuse me?
I said because you're normal. You're ungrateful. We fight, risk our lives for you. Evil mutants, robots, crazy aliens. I lie because the truth is we're nothing like you. Thank God, because it's the only reason you people are still alive.
I don't think I've ever seen a character that has done a 180 on their perception by the general public more than Cyclops. For being the leader, he was kind of put on the sideline for more popular characters like Wolverine or Storm being dropped from Marvel vs. Capcom 3's roster. Live action movies tend to, And even in the 2010s, we had a show titled Wolverine and the X-Men, which must suck to play second fiddle to a guy who canonically smells like a dumpster and says a lot about how the people viewed the X-Men, especially Scott Summers. But ever since the release of 97, red hair dye and sometimes blonde has never been more in fashion because people cannot get enough of Scott Summers. The only other time I can think of a character's image was revived so fast was probably, funnily enough, Tony Stark after the first Iron Man movie. You gotta understand the short time between the first Iron Man movie and Civil War, his reputation was absolutely in the gutter. With Reed Richards, you can make superhero Guantanamo Bay and go whoopsie daisies when your wife reminds you what you're doing. People forgave him, but while people still hold Civil War over Tony's head. But still, Scott Summers is more popular than ever, is what I'm trying to say. But due to how he's portrayed in mainly animated projects compared to his comic counterpart, Scott is barely a Boy Scout. A common misconception I tend to see is that people kind of put him on the same pedestal as Steve Rogers, a level-headed leader when the team needed him the most, was able to stand up and lead the X-Men. Nowadays, oh yeah, no, he's nothing like that anymore. The guy, when push comes to shove, does not take it lying down, is more than happy to take things to 11. But for good reason. Scott, as not just as a leader, nor as a mutant, as a person, has gone through so much. Tragedy has almost followed him for his whole life. But on top of that, has to shoulder the burden that all mutants face. Every ounce of discrimination and loss is another weight added onto his shoulders. That's what I want to go over today. I want to talk about how Scott has become Marvel's most tragic character. I think a perfect start to this video would be to go over his origin, because the deaths of Cyclops' trauma go all the way back to the age of 10, when him and his family are in his father's vintage airplane when is attacked by a mysterious alien spaceship, because comics. In a desperate attempt to save their children, Scott's mother pushes both of their sons out of the plane. The last image Scott sees of her is in utter despair, hoping they make it out safe, their final words telling them they both love them, and giving Scott the responsibility to take care of his little brother, not to let go no matter what. Though, while the parachute is deployed, it's immediately shot by a stray beam, setting it on fire. Though they're able to land somewhat safely, where Alex is okay, Scott smashes and hits his head. This moment would cause lasting damage to Cyclops, not only being the main reason he can't properly control his powers, but also, I don't see people tend to see it this way, but Cyclops is literally a disabled man for the rest of his life. He has constant migraines, and the way the comic illustrates this is his inability to control his mutant gift, and uses the ruby glasses made by Professor X as a way to help with his impairment. I think it's a really cool metaphor of how people with disabilities can struggle in life. We can see this when Scott Summers is in an orphanage and at night begins to suffer from an intense migraine and flashbangs an entire room full of children. After causing thousands of dollars worth of property damage, flees into the forest until he runs into Charles Xavier, handing him his iconic visor, welcoming him to his mansion for gifted children. We cut to 12 years later where 22-year-old Cyclops is taken to a room with a project named Cerebro, an essential tool to find other mutants around the world, where Xavier tells Scott, just like him, has the ability to inspire others. So he wants him to take up the title as the leader of the X-Men and usher into the next generation of mutants. Scott at first is taken aback and doesn't know if he can do it. Hell, he even says that he wants to leave the X-Men. But Charles doesn't take this lightly and tells him that he has to take this role, that children will die without him, and asks him a simple question: "Are your eyes open?" Causing Scott to think about his first time facing Magneto and being the original 5 X-Men. Without them, he would be killed by the Master Magnetism, and he regains the confidence to accept his role as the leader of the X-Men, saying that he won't only lead the X-Men, but every mutant. Herein lies the problem with Scott becoming the leader. He never had the choice, really. I mean, Xavier was the closest thing he had to as a father, after the plane crash and raised him fully expecting him to take the role of a leader. But the thing is that Scott never had a chance to live his own life, let alone his own childhood. At least Havoc, he got to make the choice to get into college and become a geophysicist, while Scott was seemingly destined to bear the burden of mutant suffrage as their leader. This radically changes Scott as a person. He's emotionally distant because he believes he has to be a good leader, leading to him being emotionally unstable and struggling to process them properly. We know this because in an early What If issue where Scott gets taken by the Shar and joins the Starjammers with his dad.
I forgot to mention.
Remember when I said that the Summers plane was attacked by the Shar Empire? Well, how do I put this? They simply got teleported onto their spaceship, where their father, Chris Summers, has a third child in space and forms a group known as the Starjammers. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. Imagine if Bruce's family, instead of dying in an alleyway, they just got abducted by aliens at the very last second. God, comics are so funny, man. Anyways, in this What If issue, Scott's personality is night and day compared to how he is in the X-Men. When he was on the Starjammers, he was a hot-headed, shoot-before-asking-questions sort of guy. While as the leader of the X-Men, he has to put his emotions behind him and think as a pure strategist. He's more reserved because he believes he has to, and when that mask slightly slips, he panics. I think a really good example of this is in the original Champions run, where a displaced teenage Scott joins the team in a state of mania, takes a shield carrier for a joyride doing tricks, but breaks down into a panic attack, shouting this is wrong, he can't be goofy enough, and he's going to let everyone down, that he's not good enough, saying that he could hurt someone if he's not careful, blaming himself repeatedly. Honestly, I think Scott's tenure as a champion is a really good insight to his character and one of the few times a writer is willing to tackle his trauma and disability with the tack it deserves. You see him talk about how he can't do things that other kids his age do, like swimming, know how it feels for a person to look at him endearingly, even cry. He doesn't know what his eyes can do to people. Every day he fears that if he lets his emotions get in the way, he'll lose control and hurt everyone around him. He's cold because he feels like that he has to. While this moment is sad, it's also a little heartfelt. For the first time, he's actually able to have a halfway decent childhood. He's able to go on adventures, settle down, go do stuff that teens would do, like watch a movie and hang out. The fact that the adult version of Scott gets to remember this is probably one of the most heartwarming moments I've seen from Scott. I like this page a lot. Don't worry, Miss Marvel, I know exactly who you are. We were captured by Atlanteans, we fought the Freelancers, and we beat the High Evolutionary. Video games, paintball, and watching movies, you guys were my friends, and I'll never forget that, because we're champions. Sorry for the tangent, I just really love the original Champions run, and I'll take any opportunity to... But speaking of child soldiers, remember how I briefly said that Scott's father had a third son after his apparent death? Well, that child was also the hero Kid Vulcan. His history goes all the way back even to the 60s original X-Men run. They were trained as sort of a backup team to Scott's, and when the original 5 X-Men were imprisoned powerless on the living island of Krakoa, they were sent out there to rescue them. When they land on the island, it's seemingly almost too late, as most of the original X-Men were seemingly killed, the sole survivor being Scott Summers. Tries having a quick family reunion, revealing to him that he is his brother. This happy moment is short-lived as Krakoa strikes again, and despite their efforts, Gabriel and his team are cut down. Scott, being the only one able to escape, a teenage Scott is cracking at the seams and tries to find comfort in his only family member left, Charles, in which he does try finding any signs of what was left of the X-Men. While he does find a flicker of the original 5's presence, Vulcan and his team aren't so lucky. They're, at least for now, seemingly killed in action. So to help Scott regain confidence and stand back up as the leader once more, you want to know what Charles did? Like a good father figure, comfort his son and tell him there's still hope, pushing him forward. You're so funny. No, of course not. He used his telepathy and made him forget he ever had a brother. Because emotions like grief only get in the way of being a leader, and that would make Scott have to feel something, so we can't have that. Which raises a lot of questions, because while conditioning Scott into a role is one thing, it's a whole other step to quietly, without his knowledge, mold his mind with telepathy and essentially bend his will to follow whatever dream you have to offer. and that if you were ever to falter, the first thing Charles will do is invade your mind, rewiring it so it can be of use to him. The worst part is that it's probably like the 10th worst thing the guy has done in general. Sometimes I think Scott beating him down is more of inevitability than a spur of the moment lashing out, because God, I cannot say this enough. Charles Xavier sucks. Hey, thanks for watching this so far. I know this video is probably going to be a lot longer than I intended it to be. I'm writing while recording this, and I'm probably honing in on the 10-minute mark already, and this is just his origin so far. And hey, if you like this video so far, do me a favor, try liking the video, subscribing, or even let me know who I should cover next. It always helps, and hey, I know, it's annoying to ask, but look, I could be shilling a mobile game ad but yeah, intermission over. While a lot of what I went over is indeed in fact his origin / early years, many would argue that this is true. It also comes from many rewrites and retcons. Let's not kid ourselves, Lee and Kirby did not intend for Gabriel Summers, Starjammers, I mean God who could, or write X-Men Origins. You could say we should dismiss these works as not intended by Scott's original creators, but not only I feel this is a little rude towards writers who came after, some of comics' most important works come after the original creator's tenure. Take DNA's Guardians of the Galaxy, Frank Miller's Batman Year One. This also goes for one of X-Men's most important writers, Chris Claremont. Outside of Lee and Kirby, is usually the one attributed for adding the most amount to the mythos of the X-Men and modern day characterization of many of them. Most importantly, our subject of today, Cyclops. You can see Scott's inability to show his emotions and properly process his grief all the way back to the start of the Claremont era, where after the original 5 X-Men are rescued from Krakoa by the all-new, all-geriatric X-Men, but after such a harrowing event, the original 5 X-Men want to take their life back into their own hands. Seeing how there's always going to be a new team to take after them, they want to finally enjoy their adulthood, their life. While Scott was originally going to leave with them, after years of conditioning, being told that he has to be their leader, that no one else can do it better than him, he begins to convince himself that leading the X-Men has been his entire life. Without it, he would be nothing, and he would also betray Xavier. He conflates his own dream with Charles, because he believes he has none. So just like that, Scott falls back into line, and regresses back to being the servient leader of the X-Men, losing what he thought was his family once more. But the worst part is losing Jean. They know they have feelings for one another, but they can't act on it now. Jean has to discover herself, but Scott thinks he finally found his place in life. It's just that place is without her. He's blinded by a sense of grandeur in life, where he can't notice what he really wants. What he needs is standing right in front of him. The moment everyone leaves, Scott gets over the departure of his friends almost instantly. He just jumps straight into business and gets down to training the new X-Men. Days on end, Scott overworks the team, trying to get them to practice through every single scenario they could face. If they begin to falter, Scott is right there to shape them back into line, to be his X-Men. They aren't his family anymore. He can't grow attached like he did before. That was his mistake. They're a team, not a family. Because if he forgets that, once again, it will only end up hurting him. After weeks of training, they're called on a mission. A nuclear site is under attack, and are sent on their first mission. After raiding what I could describe as DashCon, it's rigged to explode and the X-Men make their escape. There's only one problem. 2 of the members of the X-Men, Banshee and Thunderbird, are on hot pursuit of a villain, escaping on a plane. Despite being told multiple times to flee the area, Thunderbird doesn't even think of leaving. But this can only end in disaster, as the plane seemingly erupts into flames and explodes, killing both him and the pilot, ending the 2-issue storyline. In the next issue, we see how Scott comes to terms with such a loss. Scott is alone in the woods, trying to process what happened. Memories of the plane exploding rush through his mind. Even when he sleeps, he can't shake the memory. A nagging feeling that if he was a better leader, he might have not died. My favorite moment from this issue is the bubble that says, "You and the X-Men had saved the world from a nuclear, but you lost a man to do it. And try as you might, you can't balance those scales in your mind or in your heart." And the mask finally slips. Scott lashes out and beams down an entire forest. He's never let loose like this before. Throughout his entire life, his powers were at the back of his mind, constantly restrained so he doesn't hurt anyone. But at this moment, he doesn't care for that. This right here perfectly demonstrates what I was trying to say in this video, that the reason why Scott is so cold and distant from people is because he cares too much. And he has to put up this mask constantly because that's the only way he can be a leader. Despite what he says, he still cares for the X-Men like a family, and it's the only way for him to throw them into danger. He couldn't live with the fact he does this. Not only leading the X-Men, but also bearing this burden of every single mutant. Deep down his subconscious aches, but he can never act on it, because how could the X-Men put their trust in a man who relinquishes himself to his emotions? Which is why I think his main love interest being Jean Grey is so interesting. Her being a telepath is able to destroy that mask both metaphorically and literally. She's the first person where he feels that he can truly be himself. He can show his insecurities on his sleeves. And for an odd number of issues, Scott and Jean get to live happily ever after. Sure, they have their moments, but they can get through them together. But that feeling of loss still haunts him to this day. All his life he has known is loss. The day his parents died in that plane crash, his brother's absence in life, losing his ability to control what should be his gift. Now that Jean's in his life, he can't possibly imagine a world without her. She's the foundation of his entire mental well-being. Without her, he would collapse. You can see the climax of this dynamic in Claremont's most iconic storyline, the Dark Phoenix saga. Now throughout this video, I've kind of assumed that you know most of these storylines. But I also know there's like a non-0% chance that at least one person might actually think Cyclops is Batman's mentor, so I'll keep a very long story short for the sake of time. The Phoenix is a cosmic being that is a manifestation of all life that is and will ever be in the universe. It was more or less overwhelmed by Jean's emotions and caused both of them to lose control of their own actions, leading to the Dark Phoenix saga. In X-Men 113, it was believed that Jean died, which, until a couple issues later, she wasn't known to do that. Then she really got good at that. But despite being a massive part of his life, Scott seemingly brushes off the death of his apparent soulmate. Pretty easily, in fact, saying that he doesn't have any grief to spare for her, unsettling many of his closest allies. They try getting him through this loss, but still, he dismisses it in his usual cold manner. He would also move on pretty fast, dating Colleen Wing for a brief moment. Jean and Scott would shortly reunite in X-Men 129. They would have a conversation about Scott's ordeal after believing Jean died. So you catch stray thoughts of Scott seeing another woman so quickly after her death. Scott tells her it all, that he has lost so much in his life. He knows that if he were ever to lose Jean, it would completely destroy him. He forces himself to avoid feeling anything because his entire psyche would shatter if he were to confront it. He compares being near Jean as much of a necessity as breathing air. He cannot live without her. They lovingly embrace one another, despite their situation, promise each other that they will help each other out. Then Jean actually died. After the conclusion of the Dark Phoenix saga, Scott would have a brief touch with his emotions. Grief envelops his consciousness. The love of his life, the only thing he couldn't lose, is now gone. But like every other time, Scott decides to bury himself in the arms of another woman. Madeline... Oh, okay, Scott, you really just have a type, man. We gotta talk about that. But Scott and Madeline hit it off really well. Almost too well. But just like how we've seen before, Scott moves on really fast and ends up marrying Madeline, I kid you not, after 7 issues. But for the first time in his life, Scott prioritized himself after their wedding. He realizes that he can't make the same mistake he did all the way back at the start of the Claremont era. He chooses his relationship over the X-Men. He's able to relinquish his role because there are people like Storm who can step up and take over. It also doesn't help that she literally beat him, but the dream could carry on without him, and that's okay. Finally, Scott can live the rest of his life in peace, no longer burdened by loss. Then this guy shows up. So just like all comics, nothing can really ever change and the status quo has to be maintained at all times, including Scott's retirement. There's 2 reasons for this being the case in particular, one real-world answer and the one in universe. The real-world explanation is that Marvel kinda didn't want to give up Cyclops at this point. You have to understand, X-Men was Marvel's biggest property because of Claremont. Before his run, they were kinda considered a C-listers team at best. But because of him, they exploded in popularity, and after the Dark Phoenix saga, they were arguably at their peak. So editorial saw no reason to slow down and give up on sales for the sake of something silly like character development. But Chris historically hated the idea of Jean and Scott returning. Their story was done and there was no reason to bring them back. So of course they brought Jean back in a Fantastic Four book behind Chris Claremont's back. And just like everyone else, the moment Scott heard the return of Jean, he immediately rushes to her side, ditching Madeline and their son. Showing the cracks of their relationship, Scott essentially used her as a way to escape facing his own grief. Sure, he cried for Jean, but the way he immediately jumped to the next relationship to start a new life? You can always change the scenery, but no matter how far you move, you can never escape yourself, and that's Scott's issue. He got with Madeline as a way to escape from dealing with a loss that he himself said that would kill him. It's not like he's malicious to Madeline, he still loved her very much, but it was wrong to neglect his family to chase feelings that were lost so long ago. He's caught up in his emotions, and the return of Jean Grey forces him to confront them in a way he was intentionally avoiding. After some time joining X Factor, Scott is urged to reach out to Madeline and Nathan again because maybe avoiding your family to get back with your dead girlfriend is probably not the greatest thing to do. He finds out the worst case scenario. Their house is completely empty and a body at the morgue looks exactly like her is shown to Scott. So in a twist of fate, he once again avoids grief by burying himself in work in the embrace of a woman he was just mourning, Jean. But just like Madeline, I was kinda hiding something. You know how every superhero has a sworn villain? Superman and Lex Luthor, Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, John Byrne in the Age of Consent? Scott has one and his name is Mr. Sinister. Well, I want to do my own video solely focusing on him. It wouldn't be a video about Cyclops and trauma if I did not mention him at least. Mr. Sinister is unique in the fact that he doesn't exactly hate Scott in the way someone like Lex does to Superman. He's more so fascinated by Scott, which is worse. Seeing the true potential of his genes at an early age and decided to orchestrate his life so he could give Sinister the best specimen as possible. After the plane crash that killed Scott's parents, Mr. Sinister actually kidnapped him and Alex and did horrific experimentations and studies on them. Once he had what he came for, Sinister would release both of the boys into an orphanage, but not wanting them to remember a thing, would implant a memory blocker that would remove their trauma and, more importantly, any idea of who Mr. Sinister was. Wanting both of the brothers to be isolated, Mr. Sinister would arrange Alex to be orphaned off. He would disguise himself as children in the orphanage, befriending Scott. He would make sure that Scott was alone, never able to be adopted. It was the day when Scott made his way to the X-Mansion was when Mr. Sinister's plot can truly begin. He wanted Scott and Jean specifically to be married and have children because he thought his offspring would be the pinnacle of mutants. The worst part is that he's kind of right. Just take a look at Hope Summers and Cable. They're some of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe. But there was just one problem. Jean died. Though, of course, like any mad scientist, planned ahead and made a clone. That clone being Madeline Pryor, who would come into contact with Scott shortly after Jean's death and have a family with him. Now that her part was done and Scott was away, could swoop in and grab Nathan and Madeline, forcing her into the role of the Goblin Queen. A manifestation of him avoiding his grief for so long and how it has hurt someone that was so close to him. Lamenting near his death, Mr. Sinister would tell Scott, "Scott, you are like a son to me, the piece of myself that I leave as a legacy of mutant kind." While this is awful, it also shows that once again, Scott has lost something that he didn't know he even lost. That he lost the ability to self-determine his own fate and his memories. Everything was predestined to happen. Every awful thing that happened to Scott, his entire upbringing was orchestrated by a man who just wanted to use him for his genes. And he didn't even know it. Not too different from other people in his life. Though I do want to talk about the new X-Men and Scott's time as a revolutionary because they do fit the theme of this video, I do have to end it at some point. While Scott is one of my favorite characters, I don't want to destroy my free time by editing an hour-long video. Plus, I think we have a pretty good idea of what Scott is near the end of the Claremont era. Scott, for all intents and purposes, is a broken man who comes from a broken home. He was forced to grow up at such an early age, he couldn't develop properly and was a child soldier. Scott makes the choices he does because he loves too much, not because it's too little, but can't reckon with the ramifications of his own heart. It's why Scott jumps from relationship to relationship. He doesn't get to have the happy ending and a family because if he did, who's going to lead the X-Men? His eyes have to be open, always vigilant to the plight of mutants, but blind to his own.